Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Jessie. Jessie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Excited to have you on the show. Jessie, before we dive into the subject though, let's get to know you a little bit. Really important. I really want to know what you love about content and marketing. Also, maybe share a little bit about your background.
What I love about content marketing is really just the mix of creativity and problem solving. I like that you are able to be creative. I do a lot of writing in the roles that I've had, but I also like making things that work and things that function, things that, get results and have an impact. So I love noodling around and, fixing things, doing user research, all of that. I'm a creative person at heart. And so getting into my background, I've done like every different kind of writing, I think. I started in radio, doing writing spots and promotion. And once I got into commercial radio, I just hated it. So I sort of was flailing and got a job at a startup where they let me write and edit so many things. And it was great that they did. I don't know if I would have, but they let me, and I was able actually to work with a lot of really incredible writers all over the country, part of that job. So I got to see a lot of really good writing. And when I got into marketing, I sort of found that intersection of what I really loved about being an editor. I love being an editor because I can see all this stuff coming together. You see all of the pieces coming in, you see the through lines of the stories, you see the theme of the issue, you see, the seasonality of things, you see, trying to get that sponsored content in there in a way that feels organic. And you can you get to see everything. I always just say that I'm nosy, so I like being an editor. And I think you get that in marketing too, where you're thinking about, campaigns or cohesive storytelling, and things like that.
So Jessie, for the subject today, it's an interesting one. So what we've talked about a little bit is something called systems thinking or content systems. Just off the get-go, when you hear that phrase, I think a lot of people can quickly say, well, that means one thing or the other. When you think of systems thinking, what does that mean and how does that contrast to maybe some of the more traditional ways of approaching marketing and content?
So when I think of systems thinking, I think of just being conscious of all of the parts of a system and how they relate, and how they interact. So, if I change A, what happens to B? And I think part of that that applies to marketing and content is really creating systems. You may think that, our blog is separate from social media, or our marketing materials are separate from what we're doing on the blog. And sure, that's fine, but could you be getting more mileage out of some of your content if you're reusing it, repurposing it? Could you get more of that cohesive storytelling if you're doing that and you have this consistent through line? Are there systems you can put in place so that you're creating things in the right time, you're being efficient? Do you have best practices? How can all of these pieces work together for the best result, and ideally the least amount of, maintenance or effort from the team?
So when you're thinking about systems thinking, and you talked about the unified efforts across like the marketing org and everything like that, how would you practically kind of implement this advice? So let's say you have a marketing team that's doing a lot of different things. how would you approach introducing systems thinkings to build some of those efficiencies and unity across the board?
I'm biased, but I love writing things down. I think there's huge power in just documentation. I know a lot of people would like roll their eyes at that, but I think there is so much power in this is the decision we've made and we wrote it down and we can go back and look at it. And if someone has a question, they can look at it. And this is what we've decided as a team. And maybe, we plan to revisit this in 3 months or, never, or whenever is appropriate for whatever you're deciding at the time. But I think there's just so much power in we've decided, here it is, we can move on. And I think there is a lot of inefficiency in this sort of like hand wavy, like we're gonna try to integrate, all these pieces. Okay,
Yep.
totally. And then, people just use the word integrate forever for the next 3 years and no one actually knows what it means, or everyone definitely knows what it means, but they don't think it means the same thing. And so I'm a huge proponent of documenting, even if it's so stupid, even if it's so small. Make a nice letterhead for your team with a little logo or something, or a font or your company logo, and put it on a Google Doc and write the purpose of this document is to, et cetera, at the top, which is my favorite thing to do. And then just, make it look nice and people will respect it. And obviously get the right approvals, but you can't get those approvals if you're not communicating these ideas. And I think that obviously you want to have metrics to back up what you're saying. And I think sometimes efficiency metrics and things like that can get so squishy. The math gets so like, well, how long did it really take us to do this? Sometimes you just don't have that data. But you can say, hey, we used to have to have 4 different versions of this and now we can have 2 or something like that. I think starting small and just saying, wouldn't this make our lives easier?
So when you're looking at systems thinkings, you mentioned and kind of hinted on it. I want to kind of go back to this. How are you able to measure some of the results and really focus on showing the value of a unified system as opposed to the different parts that are separated and whatnot? How do you kind of analyze and communicate the value of systems thinking?
That's just so highly dependent on the kind of system. To me, I think systems thinking, it takes so much coordination with different teams. But once you're thinking about the things you do together as interrelated and not siloed, and start creating KPIs around, these broader numbers instead of, how many people opened this, how many people clicked through this one email, and more about like, are we selling these tours that we're promoting across all of our materials? Are people understanding what we're trying to tell them? Things like that. It's a bit of a different way of thinking as opposed to we've all been in places where everyone just has their one goal and it doesn't matter if it's detrimental to other teams of the organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like your phrase that systems thinking doesn't require systems per se. So what are maybe some common systems and ways to manage those that don't require some form of an investment to buy new software or systems? What are some of the most common ones you'd recommend?
I made an editorial calendar at a travel company in a Google Sheet, and it just had the months of the year as one row. The second row was sort of this traveler mindset where beginning of the year, we're thinking about, where do we want to go this year? Middle of the year, everyone's traveling. End of the year, everyone's really excited about sharing all of their pictures online and maybe getting ready for the next trip, or really identifying as a traveler, that type of content. And then underneath that was seasonality, where we knew different trips tend to sell better and what we are always promoting at different types of year, and just layers. I had this layer cake of things for us to pick from. So then when we had the meetings, it would almost sort of like we could triangulate all of the things that we had already decided that were just living in different people's heads in the organization of like, we want to push these tours at this time. This is the traveler mindset at this time. This is, the seasonality piece at this time. We just put it all in one document. And we're able to look at it and say, okay, this is our editorial calendar. This is what everyone's going to look at. And everyone's going to say, this is how I can spin off of this.
Yeah. I like that. So the editorial calendar is a great one that you can get everyone aligned on. Any other examples of some cool systems that people should be thinking about in their business?
So another one was when I was on the design system team, I owned all of our documentation for the design system. If you don't know, a design system is a collection of components that are reusable to build digital experiences. So if you think of things like buttons and images and little promo flags and things like that, any sort of visual element on a website that is repeated multiple times, you can put it in the design system, and then people don't have to build it every time. They can copy paste. Same with designing. You can copy paste the component into your design, makes things much faster. So with that background, I was in charge of all of the documentation. So how to use all of the components, because there's a lot of considerations for things like accessibility and usability that, when you just have a button that anyone can take and copy and paste into their design, we want to make sure we're having standards for how we're labeling the button. What is the text on the button? Is it an action word? Can we have 5 different words on the button? All of those types of things. So that's what that documentation, there were a lot more complicating factors there as well. But I was also in charge of our internal communications and education, because our users were internal. So we were building a system for other people who worked at our company, which was actually so much fun because you go to work every day making things better for the people you would see at the office or on Zoom calls. And that's really nice. Getting immediate direct feedback is not always the best, but it tended to, it's very informative. So in terms of communication education, a lot of designers came to us never having used a design system, for example. So we started, like a design system 101 education program. But at the time, the system was also really new, so it was constantly changing. And so we had to make sure, as we were sort of introducing new technology, that we were putting the right content into the training for the designers and the training for the engineers. We had to make sure that worked with, we would put out newsletters every month about here's what's changed, and just making sure all of those pieces fit together in terms of what we were telling people about the system. So we went through an exercise around like, what are our design principles? Like, what are the things that guide us when we're creating the system? And we really sort of pulled those through. How are we communicating with the teams? And how are we having this education program as well? And just making sure that, it's so helpful to think like, if we're putting out an update on Slack, we can just copy and paste it also into an email, and maybe we add a little color and some images in the email. Yeah. And that's, because people consume information in different places. Can we put that on the website as well? Or, how do we, I guess, communicate our process? There's a lot of governance, and processes as well, and just making sure that we're using that consistent language, because as the team grows too, we have a lot of mouthpieces for the system. We don't have just like one approved person who's talking to our users. Literally everyone on the team can get a Slack message asking a question. So again, having that sort of tight system of education materials and documentation and communications was really helpful in giving people those talking points. So when they were reached out to directly, we were able to have good conversations and not lead people astray as much.
I love it. So and I know we're coming up on time, so I apologize. I have a lot of questions though, so this is really fascinating. Maybe just one more before we call it good today. How do you look at identifying? Because obviously, a lot of systems that you're going to build are going to be very unique circumstances to your business and everything you're doing. Do you have any recommendations for how to identify opportunities for systems? Like, how do you look at things? How do you start to analyze them? Like, how can you? Sounds like a terrible analogy, but like, how do you kind of sniff around for opportunities to build a system? What would you say there?
First part is I have such a low threshold for doing things that are annoying. So
Okay.
if I have to do something that's really annoying and it's something that I have to do like a monthly newsletter, nothing makes a month feel shorter than when you have to put out a monthly newsletter. I I tend to start sniffing around and saying, there's got to be a better way. I'm queen of there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And I think so that's part of it, is having that drive to want to, because it is very easy to sort of just stay in your silo and just, do your work and go home. And that's great. And that's everyone's right. But I personally am very nosy, as I said. I like seeing how all of the pieces work together. So I think having an understanding of how everything works around you, I think that is really important, because that's when you start seeing the relationships, or what should, have relationships, that we're like, why are we doing this thing here and this thing here? When I was on the design system team, we kind of created our own competency model for measuring performance. And one of the things we talked about was a T-shaped approach to learning. I don't think we made that up, but having this, basically, if you think of the letter T, the top is this broad knowledge. You have this sort of shallow but broad knowledge where you have an understanding of, for example, on the design system team, you have an understanding of kind of how everything works at this high level. And you can speak intelligently and answer questions to the point where you know enough to say, I know the person that can answer this for you. Like, I know what you're talking about. I can ask the designer, or just have that, or, where you can start to make those connections. And then, the upright part of the T is your specialty, and you were the expert in this place. So I was the expert on documentation and education. And, people would come to me and always ask me questions about that, because I had been there from the beginning and I knew everything. I could probably recite so much of that by heart. So I think that is really important too, is that top of the T, I think, is just so important to understand what is going on around you and how does it work, and why are we doing things the way that we're doing them? And I think asking that question in an actually open-minded way, and not a upset way, has been a learning curve for me, for sure. I've definitely, my curiosity of things has just grown. As you learn more and more about the complexity of certain organizations and how we're doing things, and you realize it's not always as simple as, you thought when you were at your first job, or when you think you're so smart. But I think coming at things with a real curiosity, understanding other people's roles and what they're doing and what their team is trying to get done, that was a big piece for a design system adoption, because again, everyone's kind of in their little silo and they have their own goals. They have their own KPIs and they're just trying to get those done. So if you can come in and say, this goal kind of sounds a lot like what we're trying to do too, or these two are really complementary, or, we're trying to build something and we need more people to sponsor it. And I think it could actually help you also. Those types of things, those connections are really important, but you can't start making those connections until you're just kind of out there doing coffee chats with people who are doing interesting projects, listening in the all company meetings where they're talking about things at a high level, paying attention, reading your email. All the things is just there's so much communication from everywhere all the time. Those things are actually really important when it comes to systems thinking.
Jessie, I've learned a ton. It's been really fascinating. There's so many opportunities to build systems. And I think that the way you described everything is really, really cool. Talking about these are the opportunities you should go after. Here are these examples. And really, I like the mindset that you were talking about of like, why are we doing it this way? And being willing and able to question that. And hopefully you're a part of an organization that accepts that and is okay with that. But I really like that. I love that mentality. I think it's great for marketers to have because, like you talked about the T-shape, we have a lot of influence across the board, and we should be building systems that ultimately align us as a business. Hats off to you. That's amazing. Super, super cool. Jessie, if anyone wants to reach out and continue the conversation online, how and where can they find you?
I have a website. It's my URL is jessie-rogers.info.
Okay.
It's embarrassing to say out loud for the first time on recording, but it's JESSIE-ROGERS.info.
Love it. I have to ask, was the .com taken?
I don't think so. Honestly, maybe, probably. It's very old. I've had this forever.
Okay.
But yeah, and also I'm on LinkedIn. So
great. Awesome. We'll link to everything in the show notes. Again, Jessie, thank you for the time and insights today.
Thank you too.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.